Galw'r cynulliad.
I call the National Assembly to order, and the first item on our agenda this afternoon is questions to the First Minister, and the first question is from John Griffiths.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's policy on economic development in South East Wales?
Yes, we plan to continue to support businesses in their growth, to invest in high-quality infrastructure and to improve economic development conditions.
First Minister, Newport has great economic potential with its transport, geographical and industrial strengths. On the M4, main rail lines and coast, part of the capital city region, neighbouring Bristol, it is the hub of its wider regional economy. So, First Minister, will you agree with me that driving economic development in Newport will be a major factor in Wales achieving its great economic potential?
Yes, I do. We want to see Newport, like all parts of Wales, developed to its full potential. A lot of work is already underway, of course, which will bring benefit to Newport, including the ongoing regeneration activity, establishment of Innovation Point, and the proposals being taken forward with regard to the M4.
Steffan Lewis.
A report by the What Works Centre for Wellbeing published recently identified 4 South East local authorities as ranking among the highest for wellbeing inequality. These included Torfaen, Blaenau Gwent, Caerphilly and Merthyr Tydfil. The report makes clear that there are a number of contributing factors, of course, and a number of possible solutions, but we shouldn't dismiss the indicators that we use, which included how worthwhile people feel about their day-to-day lives. Economic development is going to be central to addressing those very deep feelings in those communities. Will the First Minister commit to rejecting now a trickle-down approach to economic development and instead put on record his commitment to a place-based approach so that any future economic plans he reveals for this country are centred on what really matters, which is people and their communities? Yes, it's certainly not the case that we accept trickle-down economics, far from it. We want to make sure that communities are connected, and that's what the South Wales Metro, for example, is about, connected digitally as well, which is why we have Superfast Cymru, and of course to ensure that people have the skills that they need in order to improve their incomes and to get jobs in the future, and that is something as a government that we're very much focused on.
Mohammed Ashkar.
Officer, First Minister, the research by the Lloyd Bank shows that the number of new businesses starting up in Wales has dropped by more than a quarter over the last 5 years. The number of businesses starts up fell by more than 27% in Caerphilly, more than 23% in Monmouth, and less than 9% in Newport and 8% in Blaenau Gwent. That doesn't show a good picture of startup business in South East Wales. What measures and incentives does the Welsh Government intend to introduce to create the economic conditions to encourage new businesses to start up in South East Wales?
Well, we have a record number of startups. We're seeing more and more young people particularly getting involved in businesses and becoming very successful in business. It's right to say, of course, that Brexit introduces an element of uncertainty, and these are uncertain times indeed for businesses, but as a government we will continue, of course, to support startups and ensure that many of those businesses become SMEs and even larger in the future.
Question 2, David Rowlands.
Will the First Minister outline the Welsh Government's plans to improve access to Cardiff Airport?
Yeah, we're continuing with the development of proposals to improve access to the airport by public transport and by car, supporting, amongst other things, of course, the current bus and rail arrangements.
I thank the First Minister for his answer, and I think all in the Chamber welcomes the huge improvement in the airport's performance since the government's intervention. But does the First Minister not agree that a rail link will greatly enhance its appeal to the international traveller and give it a competitive edge over other local airports? So can he tell us why this has not been included in the Metro project?
Well, can I welcome what the member has said about the airport, in particular his comments about the progress the airport has made since the Welsh Government took it over. They're not comments that are record on that side of the chamber, who would happily have seen it overgrown by now if it had been left in their hands. He does ask an important question, though. Can I say to him that the focus is at the moment on the bus service, on looking at improving the frequency on the current railway line, and then beyond that looking to see either it is we should consider a rail spur. There are issues with that. There will be opposition, that's true. Or whether, in fact, at some point in the future, the terminal itself would move closer to the existing railway line. So at the moment, it's a question of improving what is already there and looking in the future to see whether there is a way of locating the terminal closer to the rail link.
Adam Price.
The agreement announced yesterday between the Welsh Government and Heathrow Airport is welcome. But, I mean, in stark contrast to that published in relation to Scotland, there's no concrete targets in the agreement, nothing on the amount of construction-related spend, nothing about the overall jobs target, nothing about landing charges or a development fund for flights. Is that because essentially the First Minister negotiated any leverage he had away by announcing his support for Heathrow without actually getting these concessions, in contrast to what the Scottish Government did?
Well, the question is about access to Cardiff Airport, but I'm more than happy to answer the question about Heathrow. I'm surprised he doesn't welcome the announcement yesterday, the fact that over 8,000 jobs will be secured, all that investment, the fact that we work with Heathrow to... Well, I mean, high-pitched screaming won't help him. The fact that we have secured commitment to manufacturing hubs outside Wales, we have an event on the 5th of July to ensure that Welsh businesses are... Well, he's still high-pitched screaming. That Welsh businesses will be able to take full advantage. He still hasn't learned his lesson. That Welsh businesses still haven't taken... would be able to...
I think the members may be screaming because the member did welcome the statement.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I'm sure the member can speak for himself, Chloe, actually, on that basis. Well, I mean, the issue is this. We have created we will be creating thousands of jobs. We will be ensuring that there will be hubs for manufacturing outside Wales. We will be ensuring that there will be routes that are being looked at to Welsh airports, not just Cardiff. And what was announced yesterday is far more substantial than Scotland has achieved.
Russell George.
Sorry, Officer. Well, I'm going to give another welcome this afternoon. I'm going to welcome the growth in passenger numbers on the T9 bus service. I think that is fantastic news to welcome. Now, given the fact that this service is such a success and is now proven to be sustainable in the long term, will you commit to scrapping the £500,000 Welsh Government subsidy for this service and instead offer subsidies to other bus services which have been axed by cuts to the bus operators' grant?
What he seems to be suggesting is we shouldn't have a bus service to the airport.
No,
I can't agree with that position.
No.
Look, it comes back to the position his party took. They didn't want the airport to succeed. At the end of the day, the Welsh Conservatives didn't want the airport to grow. They were happy to see the airport decline. They were sat on their backsides and seeing the airport closed down. They're still not happy at the fact that the airport is doing well in reality. They don't want to see a bus service to the airport. We want to make sure that our public transport links to our airport in Cardiff, and they will continue. Having public transport links, surely, to any airport, whether they are bus or rail, are hugely important to the future development of any airport.
Hannah Blythen.
Well, I welcome the partnership agreement between Welsh Government and Heathrow in respect of airlines want to fly out of Wales Cardiff Airport to Heathrow and the potential of thousands of new skilled jobs it could create alongside boosting the Welsh economy. However, for my constituencies and people and businesses across North East Wales, it's increased and better connections with airports such as Liverpool and Manchester that make a direct difference to them. So, First Minister, can I urge that enhanced connectivity and greater efficiency of train links to the neighbouring North West England airports form a key part of the North East Wales metro plans and are considered as part of the Wales and Borders franchise?
Yes, I can say that with the support of the Welsh Government, Arriva Trains Wales secured additional paths from the north of Wales to Manchester Airport. Those additional services started operating in May of last year, and we are working, of course, with Mersey Travel to develop opportunities for delivering new services to Liverpool and to John Lennon Airport in the next franchise on the reopened Halton Curve.
Neil McAvoy.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I put in a Freedom of Information request to Cardiff Airport, owned by the Welsh public. I wanted to know how much money had been spent on lobbying firms, what companies had been employed, and whether or not there had been a tender process gone through by those lobbying companies. Now, this is owned by the Welsh public, so the public have a right to know these things. The airport have refused to answer. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, there are ways of appealing if he feels that his request hasn't been dealt with.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinydd.
Questions now from the party leaders. Leader of the UKIP group, Neil Hamilton.
Whilst the First Minister was away last week, he may have seen that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance wrote to the Chancellor of the Exchequer about proposed public spending cuts in 2 or 3 years' time, which is said to amount to £3.5 billion. The government this year is running a budget deficit equivalent to £60 billion, and George Osborne managed the singular achievement of borrowing twice as much money in 6 years as Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling, and the national debt is now £1,800 billion compared with £1,200 billion 6 years ago. That's £28,000 for every person in Wales, indeed the United Kingdom. It's very easy to spend money we haven't got, of course, and everybody would like to be able to borrow interminably and never to have to pay it back. By how much does he think the government's borrowing requirement should increase on a permanent basis?
Strong case indeed for borrowing now to invest for the future. It's never been cheaper to borrow money on the world markets. We know from the experience after the end of the Second World War, when the UK was in a far worse position than it is now financially, that the government of the day took the position that it would seek to borrow money in order to invest for the future. And then we saw, of course, the economic growth of the 50s and indeed 1960s. So I'm unashamedly Keynesian in this regard. I take the view that government should be borrowing now in order to invest, in order to create the income that will pay back the cost of that borrowing and more in the future.
Yeah, but the First Minister knows that never happens. And he has only to look at the recent history of the UK government's debt position to see what is the reality. We have a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales, a very good thing it is too. But what we're doing by carrying on this rake's progress of borrowing, of course, is to hand on to the next generation a massive debt which they will have to repay. I don't think that's a terribly moral position for us to hold. But there's a better solution to this. We don't have to borrow that money at all. We can look at what the government spends money on at the moment and cut without any risk to anybody in Britain being disadvantaged. Let's just take the foreign aid budget, for example, on which we're spending £12 billion this year. If we just knocked £3.5 billion off that £12 billion, that would amount to the same sort of saving that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance wants the Chancellor of the Exchequer to avoid deducting from the Welsh Government's budget. And there are plenty of reasons why we should cut the foreign aid budget. So is the First Minister putting the interests of people in foreign countries before the interests of the people of Wales?
Well, I think the leader of UKIP is being naive in what he says. I mean, first of all, there is the obvious moral question of those countries that are rich helping those countries that are poor. The example of Norway is a prime example of that. The Norway grants were set up by the Norwegian government because they felt they'd done very well at oil and gas and wanted to give something back to people who had less. So that altruism and that desire to help humanity is hugely strong. But also, if we look at it economically, aid buys friends and allies. And if you don't provide aid to countries in order to help them, and they will remain your friend in the future, someone else will do it. And so, yes, it's right to say that there is a strong moral case for aid, but in diplomatic terms, it's also correct to say that if you offer aid to countries that grow in the future, they will remain your friends and will trade with you in the future, increasing the wealth of their own people and, of course, buying the goods that you manufacture.
Of course, there is a humanitarian case for aid, and nobody is against that. But a lot of our aid budget actually goes to countries that are spending a huge amount of money upon projects that we wouldn't regard for a moment as humanitarian. For example, we're increasing our aid to Pakistan this year by £100 million to nearly £450 million a year, and Pakistan this year is increasing its defence budget by £635 million to £6.7 billion. They spend far more per capita on defence than we do in the United Kingdom. They've also got a nuclear programme and a space programme, and so what we're in effect doing by increasing the amount of aid that we're giving to Pakistan is indirectly to fund their military, space and nuclear budgets.
Well, he uses one example. There are many, many other examples of countries where people have suffered greatly, a lot of it due to the ineptitude of the European powers, who left those countries with artificial boundaries and with economic incoherence, who left those countries without a tradition of governance, and they were left to struggle as a result of it. Many of those countries now have good governance. If we look at Ghana, for example, Ghana as a country is a country where governance is robust, yet many of the people there are paying for the mistakes that were made in the 1960s after independence. I see nothing wrong in providing aid to people in order to enable them to survive, of course, but in order to enable people to develop themselves economically, and of course to enable those people then to provide for their families. I was in Uganda 2 years ago. The one thing that struck me about Uganda was the sheer entrepreneurial spirit of the people. What they didn't have was capital. Yeah. Coffee was the main cash crop. They saved money from coffee in order to provide themselves with capital. They had no other way of doing it. The great thing that had happened in Uganda was banking via mobile phones. People could transfer money around in a way they couldn't do before. For many, many people around the world, they just need a bit of help in order to prosper. And that's why we give aid to people in order to make sure that they can prosper in the future and their communities can prosper in the future.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru,
Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
First Minister, on January the 16th, you introduced your trade union bill, and the intention of that bill is to disapply aspects of the UK Government's Trade Union Act. Plaid Cymru supports this. We believe that industrial relations should be decided upon here and not in Westminster. Your trade union bill will be in competence under the Assembly's current powers. Do you believe that it will be in competence under the reserved powers model that we are moving to under the new Wales Act?
The competence will change, but our belief is this. We will pass this legislation. We will do what is right by the people of Wales. It is a matter then for the UK Parliament to decide whether it wishes to override a bill, an act that was passed by the people of Wales in their Parliament. If they choose to do that, they will precipitate a constitutional crisis.
Well, the Wales Act implements a heavy list of restrictions, and industrial relations is one of those restrictions. And we heard from the Constitutional and Legal Affairs Committee yesterday that the UK Government intends to legislate on industrial relations once the Wales Act is in force, and they use the words "at the earliest opportunity." If you want to reduce strike action, the best way isn't through legal restrictions, but through negotiation, dialogue, and a social partnership approach that is advocated by a majority of people in this Assembly. You've said that you still intend to take the trade union bill through this Assembly. What is your plan to ensure that its provisions are not overruled by the UK Government?
We will do everything that we can to make sure that doesn't happen. We will take this legislation through the Assembly, and we believe it will pass with the support of not just of the governing parties, of course, but with their own party as well, we trust. It is a matter then for the UK Parliament and the House of Lords particularly to decide whether it is constitutionally appropriate to seek to overturn legislation made in a devolved Parliament by the elected members of that devolved Parliament acting within competence. That is a serious constitutional matter that the UK Parliament will embroil itself in if it goes down that line.
Thank you. I wonder if we'll now see another Supreme Court case, and I'm sure that you'd agree that that would be a damning verdict on the Wales Act. Now, Plaid Cymru voted against the legislative competence motion on the Wales Act because we were of the view that it could lead to a Westminster power grab. Would you agree that this now looks like a vindication of our position on that vote? There is agreement across most of this chamber that the Wales Act is not going to provide a lasting settlement, as the UK Government stated its objective was to achieve that. Will you state today whether you believe that the Wales Act 27 is unworkable? And if you do think it's unworkable, do you support Plaid Cymru's call for a new Wales Bill immediately?
It's not unworkable, but it is unsatisfactory. She and I are in exactly the same position on this. The current legislation was part of a package. There were parts of it we did not like and did not accept. But nevertheless, it took this Assembly forward when it was viewed as a package. Does it mean there's unfinished business? Of course. The issue of the jurisdiction is still unfinished. The issue of policing is still unfinished. The issue of the fact that APD is devolved in Scotland but not in Wales for no sensible, logical or rational reason. And yes, undoubtedly there will be another Wales bill which will improve on the one that we've had recently.
Arweinydd y Ceidwald.
Leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew R.T. Davies.
Presiding officer. First Minister, today there's this startling news that 5 people a week are dying in Wales, or 5 people a day, sorry, are dying in Wales because of air pollution. And this is a frightening figure that my colleague David Melding many times has raised in this chamber, and the Welsh Conservatives led a debate on this in July. Many communities would rightly be looking to the Welsh Government to try and understand what measures the Government will be taking to improve air quality through the lifetime of this Assembly. And I'd be grateful if you could give us some understanding of the action that the Welsh Government is taking to make sure communities such as those in Caerphilly County Borough, which are cited in the Week In, Week Out programme today, can take comfort from and see real improvement.
Well, ultimately, of course, it's for local authorities to review local air quality. We do assist them in terms of doing that. We are considering responses to the recent consultation that was held on this subject. It did recognise the immediate and long-term health benefits to be gained by reducing pollution exposure across Wales. One area, of course, which has a beneficial effect on air quality is to encourage more people onto public transport, which is why, of course, we passed the Active Travel Act in order for that to happen. We do need to see, of course, more investment in public transport in Wales. We're doing our bit with the Metro. We do need to make sure now that we see electrification take place to Swansea, as was promised by the UK Government, in order to encourage more people onto the trains and out of cars. But the more we can reduce car use and provide an alternative to car use, the better it will be for air quality.
As I said, 5 people a week are dying because of air quality issues in Wales. That's 2,000 people a year. That is a frightening figure, and as Public Health Wales have identified today, it is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, issue that we do face. The programme Week In, Week Out today invited the Welsh Government to take part in that programme, and regrettably they chose not to and just issued a written statement. Can you understand why people are concerned that they're not seeing real progress in their communities when they can't see the lead coming from the Welsh Government to make these improvements? As I understand it, the figure of infringements is 18, and yet the community in Caerphilly County Borough that is cited has had 57 different infringements of air quality in that particular area, and yet they are still blighted day in, day out with the pollutants in the atmosphere of that particular area. We do need to get a sense of what we can calibrate at the end of this Assembly as looking at success in this particular area. What would you deem as a successful outcome from the measures that you will be taking by 2021, First Minister?
Well, it will be a reduction in the amount of PM10s in the atmosphere and potentially PM2.5s as well. If we look at reducing emissions, I mentioned the consultation earlier on. Our response to that consultation is to be published shortly. What is our contribution? Looking at the South Wales Metro, looking at the Metro in the North East of Wales to provide an alternative to car use, which means a reduction in the amount of exhaust fumes coming out of cars, so making sure people have that alternative, promoting the Active Travel Act so that more people are able to cycle as well, again, not using cars. The problem is, of course, that with the new changes to vehicle excise duty that are going to be coming in, that after the first year of a car's existence, every car, regardless of its emissions, will pay the same road tax. Now, we've had a system for years where those cars that pollute the most pay the most. Now we're moving on to a system where it's a flat fee. Now, I think that's wrong. I can understand the UK Government having to change the system, otherwise eventually hardly anyone will pay road tax. I understand that. But I think it's wrong to move to a system where effectively, if you have a car that has a huge amount of emissions, you pay the same as somebody whose car is very, very light in terms of emissions, and that won't help air quality in Wales.
Would you agree, as First Minister, to convene a summit on this particular issue of all the interested public bodies so that there can be a joined-up approach to it on the basis that we do generally across parties want to see improvements? When you have a public health issue that is taking 2,000 lives a year within Wales, leave alone other parts of the United Kingdom, that, I would suggest, is rated as pressing #1 button in your list of priorities, I would suggest. And there does seem to be an element of divergence when it's delivered within communities the length and breadth of Wales, and it does need some centralising coordination here. Will you agree to hosting a summit to make sure that progress can be made on this agenda item so that we can see genuine improvements across Wales, but importantly, improvements to make sure that we do not continue to see the number of people dying through poor air quality going up in Wales?
Yeah. I mean, one of the issues that is increasingly a problem as well, of course, is cars idling in traffic jams, leaving their engines on. and that does create particular areas of particularly low air quality, which means, yes, there are several ways of dealing with that. One is making sure that the blockages are removed. It also means, of course, that we look at ways of promoting more hybrids and electric cars in the future. There are a number of ways in which that can be done. As part of the response to the consultation that's taking place, we will look to be as inclusive as possible in our approach. We have to do that, of course, working with local government as well as the main monitors of local air quality in order to make sure that we can continue to improve the air that the people of Wales breathe.
Question 3.
Question 3, Mark Isherwood.
How is the Welsh Government helping to reduce the barriers to employment for people with long-term fluctuating health conditions?
Well, we're taking a preventative approach to removing health barriers to work through the Healthy Working Wales programme, and our new all-age employability plan will strengthen our approach to supporting low-activity groups, including support for those with longer-term health conditions to access employment opportunities.
Thank you. Well, after Action for ME delivered an employment support programme for people with ME with the North Wales Bristol NHS Trust, 72% of clients achieved their employment goals. How will you ensure that, therefore, that the Welsh Government, looking at the good practice very nearby across the border, how the Welsh Government will address the barriers faced by people with long-term fluctuating conditions such as myalgic encephalomyelitis, and ensure that these are co-produced produced co-productively in accordance with the Social Services and Wellbeing Act 2014 requirements?
Well, I've already mentioned, of course, the employability plan. I can say, in terms of Healthy Working Wales, over 3,000 organisations employing around 460,000 people are part of, are engaged with Healthy Working Wales. It represents about 33% of the working population, with an investment of over £800,000 per year in the programme. We're also supporting workplaces to tackle the stigma and discrimination associated with mental health problems through the Time to Change Wales organisational pledge.
Gareth Bennett.
Llywydd, I welcome your reference to mental health issues, which was what I was going to raise. One effective measure in treating mental health problems is talking therapy, which can reduce the need to prescribe medication, which would itself enhance the ability of people to enter the job market. What is the Welsh Government doing to assist with the provision of talking therapy in Wales?
We do recognise, as far as mental health is concerned, it can't all be pharmaceutical intervention. Counselling is important, as is, of course, exercise. And exercise is available in parts of most of Wales, I think, in terms of it being prescribed to people. Our delivery plan, Together for Mental Health, is there, of course, to help people in Wales become more resilient and to be able to tackle poor mental well-being when it occurs. And so, as part of that plan, we look at different therapies that will help people in different and more effective ways.
Question 4, Jeremy.
Question 4, Jeremy Miles.
To make a statement on digital communications infrastructure in Wales.
Yes, through the Superfast Cymru project and ongoing regular discussions with mobile network operators, Ofcom and the UK Government, we have facilitated access to fast fibre broadband to over 630,000 Welsh premises and secured confirmation of a 90% mobile geographic coverage in Wales by the end of this year.
Can I congratulate the Welsh Government on progress in rolling out Superfast broadband? As we move to address the final gaps in that and to improve on mobile connectivity, it's clear that the topography of Wales, beautiful as it is, poses particular challenges to digital connectivity and that we may need greater proportionate access to infrastructure than other parts of the UK to reach the same level of coverage finally. I look forward to the Welsh Government's mobile plan, and I hope it contains steps to press operators to share infrastructure. But in addition, will the First Minister confirm that Welsh Government will look at how publicly owned land can be used where appropriate to locate digital infrastructure, and as we look post-Brexit at how we use public funds to support land management, that we consider how future programmes can be used to incentivise the location of digital infrastructure in rural and semi-rural areas where they can make a difference to connectivity Wales-wide.
Well, we will look carefully at regional economic funding in the context of the forthcoming Mobile Action Plan and during the next phase of Superfast broadband development to see how best this could support the targeted delivery of communications infrastructure on a more regional or local basis. There are some parts of Wales where there is no coverage We know there are some parts of Wales, the Isle of Anglesey is one example, raised often in the chamber by the member for Ynys Môn, where there appears to be coverage, yet it's not powerful enough to deliver data coverage. And so there are issues that will need to be resolved for the future, and using regional economic funding is one way in which that might be done.
Dai Lloyd.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd.
Thank you very much, Llywydd. First Minister, I've received complaints from representatives of the business community on the quality of Wi-Fi services on trains running between Swansea and Paddington. Now, this is often because of poor signal on the route. As this is a crucially important service for us here in Wales, what is your government doing in collaboration with the Westminster Government and the private companies running the network to improve the signal along this route and other routes across Wales?
Well, as one who has used that service many times, I have to say that majority of the time it doesn't work. And when it does work, it doesn't work very effectively. We are in touch with Great Western, of course, in order to ensure that the service will ultimately improve. I mean, I know it's possible. I've seen it on other trains where the system works well, and we wish to ensure, of course, by considering the franchise next year, that this is something which will be quite normal in every train in Wales.
Minister, you mentioned fast fibre in your answer to Jerry Miles' initial question about broadband services. And I'll start with some good news that the village of Tintern on the River Wye in my constituency has been very luckily recently connected to a super fast broadband box, which is pleasing the village no end. On the flip side, and the rural hinterland of Trelec Grange, a village just outside, they haven't benefited from that box. And BT seem to be under the impression that the whole area is now being served by superfast broadband and the problem has been dealt with. Can you liaise with BT to make sure that when a village in a rural area is connected, that a neighbouring area that isn't so lucky is not then considered to have been dealt with in the same way, because those people then don't have much hope for any end date to their broadband problems?
I will investigate the issue for the member and will write to the member with a response.
Hywel Anker-Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd, and I think mine is a straightforward question that may have a straightforward answer. It's fantastic work being done by Superfast Business Wales in their roadshows and their workshops right across the country. And as I look through a tremendous list of places they go into, it's quite impressive in how they're raising the potential and how to get those connections up. But the one place that's missing in all this north, south, east and west is one of the heartlands of great industry in South Wales, and it's Bridgend. So could I suggest that through his good offices and mine, we might persuade them to bring one of the roadshows to Bridgend, possibly north of the M4 and the Ogmore patch?
Well, standing here, I can't comment on behalf of the Assembly member for Bridgend, but I'm sure that the member's words will find resonance with that member.
Question 5, Angela Burns.
Question 5, Angela Burns.
Good afternoon. What plans do you have, First Minister, to address the barriers that are facing GP recruitment in Wales?
Well, we will continue to work with our partners, including GPC Wales, to address the challenges faced by the GP workforce in Wales. That work will be supported with £27 million for general medical services during 2017 to 18, as was announced at the weekend.
Thank you for that. I've met with a great many of the organisations that represent all facets of the GP work sphere. And of course, the issue of professional indemnity is one of the major points that comes across as a barrier for getting more GPs who currently are either thinking of retiring, work part-time, to release more of their GP hours and go into GP practices, which would indeed help with all of the queues and problems that we see in GP practices. I am aware that some of that £27 million is earmarked to help to offset some of that indemnity. But what I really wanted to know was that I understood that the Cabinet Secretary had commissioned a report by Welsh Government lawyers into this issue. And I was wondering if the First Minister could tell me if this report has been completed. And if so, could you share with us the advice that it gave the Cabinet Secretary?
This is something that is under active discussion with the profession in order to move that forward. I can say that the package that was announced on the weekend is designed, amongst other things, to increase the contribution, as the member says, towards the rising costs of professional indemnity, as well as, of course, dealing with things such as the increased cost of pensions administration and a general uplift to deal with increasing practice costs.
Adam Price.
Un o'r rwystredigaethau
One of the frustrations is that qualified students from Wales who do want to be trained in Wales in our medical schools don't have the opportunity to undertake that training. When we look at the percentages in England, 80% of the students in medical schools are from England, 50% in Scotland, but only 20% in Wales. Now, can we guarantee that all Welsh domicile students who have the ability to study can access a training place here in Wales? And of course, that has a great impact then on the ability to retain them here within our health service.
Well, I must say, and I'm sure that he's heard the same thing, that people have told me that they've seen examples of young people who have not received an offer to study in Cardiff, but have received an offer to study in England. And this is something which concerns me, because if they're good enough to go to England, well, then they should be good enough to attend a Welsh university. What I will do, this was being considered recently, but I will write to the member on this subject. I've heard people telling me this, and I'm sure he has heard the same, and it is important that we understand the selection system for students in order to ensure that Welsh students receive fair play.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, there is strong evidence base suggesting that medical students are more likely to want to practice in the long term where they have trained. Therefore, I welcome Cwm Taf Health Board's initiative, whereby in partnership with Cardiff University Medical School, 60 medical students each year have experienced the early part of their training in GP surgeries in the South Wales Valleys. First Minister, do you agree that giving medical students this exposure to general practice early on is crucial to promoting it as a career choice? And how else can we promote the Valleys as a good place for GPs to work?
Well, this is something, of course, that's hugely important, as the member says. If we look, for example, at the Rhondda cluster in Cwm Taf, that's been particularly active in terms of recruiting. It's hugely important, of course, that a student goes somewhere and has a positive experience. And that's why it's hugely important that we're able to do that. If we look at the Rhondda cluster as an example, they have a cluster communications officer to build the reputation of the Rhondda as a great place to work. They developed the Rhondda Docs website, which describes the lifestyle and career available in the Rhondda, and they developed the recruitment and retention survey and analysis, which will form part of the cluster's delivery plan in the new financial year. And that's one example that can be used or adapted by other clusters in order to make sure that when students actually do their GP training in valley areas, that they feel they're coming to a place that is forward-thinking, that is well-resourced and has GPs who are dedicated to their community. And in all those respects, the clusters fulfil those obligations.
Question 6, Jane Bryan.
Question 6, Jane Bryan.
Will the First Minister make a statement on midwifery practices in Wales?
Well, midwives play a vital role in supporting women through their childbirth experience. Every woman has a named midwife to provide individualised care during pregnancy. The £95 million health education funding package recently announced includes a 40% increase in midwifery training places, and that is the highest level of midwifery training places commissioned since devolution.
Thank you, First Minister. The Royal College of Midwives report this year highlighted the growing age of the midwifery workforce and the need to ensure we replace those highly skilled and dedicated workers when they retire. As you said, the news of the 40% increase in the number of university places for student midwives in the coming academic year and the continuing support for bursaries is very welcome. Commitments like this are essential to ensure that our maternity services attract more midwives over the coming years so they can deliver safe, high-quality care for women and babies. Will the Welsh Government pay tribute to the dedicated midwifery workforce that we have, and will the Government work with health boards and trade unions to make sure that those approaching retirement can pass on their valuable skills and experience to the next generation of midwives?
Yes, absolutely. And it's why, of course, we have increased the number of midwife training places. We know that it's hugely important to invest in the workforce of the future by making that investment now, rather than wait to a time we find that we have a demographic problem with the workforce. We're making that investment now on the part of the people of Wales.
Rhina Piorwerth.
Thank you. I will also draw the First Minister's attention to a letter that I received from the WI branch in Llangwyn in my constituency, which makes the case for investment in midwifery services. They are particularly concerned about the sustainability of the workforce. And yes, you say that there has been investment in more training places, but does the First Minister agree with me that unless we see a significant increase in the training places available in Wales, that it will be impossible for us to provide for mothers and their families in the future with the kind of care that they need and deserve?
Well, yes, we have invested to ensure that there are more places available. We've seen a 40% increase in the numbers of places, training places available. And as I said earlier, that's since 1979.
First Minister, you will be aware of the massive campaign a couple of years ago to ensure that we had appropriate midwifery services and a consultant-led maternity ward at Ysbyty Glan Clwyd. We previously welcomed the development proposals of the Cernic unit, and it would be really appreciated if you could just update members here today on as to how well that is progressing and how that will lead to providing a first-class consultant-led midwifery service to us in North Wales.
Well, the members over the Cernic. Cernic, of course, is a specialist unit. As members will recall, the original proposal was to move those services to Arrow Park. I took the view that we had to review that decision to see if it was possible and safe for that service to be delivered in Wales, and sure enough, the Cernic is the result of that. It's progressing well in terms of recruitment and in terms of building, and I look forward to the Cernic opening on the site of Glan Clwyd.
Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, during the previous Assembly, the Welsh Government increased the number of student midwifery places. However, in the latest State of Midwifery Services, the Royal College of Midwives state that it is no longer appropriate to maintain a steady number of training places as the midwifery population is ageing. What plans does your government have to increase the number of training places for student midwives in Wales?
Well, as I said in my answer to the original question, the health education funding package that was announced recently does include a 40% increase in midwifery training places.
Question 7.
Question 7, Michelle Brown.
Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on enforcement action made under the Animal Welfare Breeding of Dogs Wales Regulations 2014, please?
Yes, the enforcement of the regulations is the responsibility of the local authorities. However, officials are working with the heads of trading standards in Wales via the Partnership Delivery Programme to capture data to assess the effectiveness of the regulations.
Okay, thank you for that answer, First Minister. Information received from anti-puppy farming campaigners says that local authorities do not have the resources to enforce the legislation. In its report, Animal Welfare in England, Domestic Pets, the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs Committee recommended that the government in the UK ban third-party sales of dogs and that dogs should only be available for licensed, regulated breeders or approved rehoming organisations. This would go a long way to shutting down the puppy farming industry that leads to the abuse and suffering of both dogs and owners. The UK government has decided to ignore this recommendation. If the First Minister has the devolved powers to do so, does he intend to ban third-party dog sales in Wales? And if he doesn't, how does the First Minister propose to take this issue further?
I think we must separate the issue of puppy farming and the issue of legitimate third-party sales. Now, I know there are some who say there's no difference, but I've heard it. I don't accept that view. I think there are those who sell as third-party, sell to third-party, by a third-party route, who are dedicated to their animals and who observe the highest standards possible. There are those who don't. There are those who don't, and they are the puppy farmers. But of course, what is hugely important is that local authorities devote the resources they should to ensuring that the regulations are enforced and that the law is observed. And indeed, I know that there was a recent court case in Ceredigion where Ceredigion Council did just that. They did enforce the law. They followed the judicial process that led to the breeder's prosecution, and they have also ensured that suitable arrangements have been made in relation to dogs removed from the premises. So local authorities are enforcing the law. It's hugely important that those people who are the real rogues, if I can put it that way, the puppy farmers, are dealt with, and the law provides the means to do that.
Bethan Jenkins.
On a wider issue of animal cruelty, obviously it's widely established that cruelty to animals is considered a gateway behaviour to violence against people. Many of those perpetrators, I'm sure, as with other things, would deny their responsibility in these acts of violence. But what are you doing to consider this as part of wider animal abuse legislation? And would you support the call that I and others in this chamber have asked of your Animal Welfare Minister to have an animal abuse register for Wales? Because if we can track these perpetrators who are taking part in this violence against animals at this early stage, if they then go on to perpetrate against people, then we can try and deflect from the seriousness of the potential things that they may do in these positions. So I would urge you to consider this seriously and to carry out research in this area.
Can I give that consideration on the member's behalf? It's an idea that's worth investigating. I don't know what the practical issues would be, but certainly I'd want to look at this further. I'll write to the member with the results of that consideration in terms of what standpoint the government is taking on this.
Paul Davis.
First Minister, I appreciate that the government gathers data at the moment which will steer any review into these regulations. Now, under these circumstances, can you give us an idea when this review will be held, and can you also publish a timetable on this issue?
There's no timetable in place at present, but of course this is something which the Minister will issue to the Assembly once it's decided.
Thank you, First Minister. I have accepted.